Folks, this week is a very special one for me. It was 10 years ago this week that I had my very first match. No, not that one. No, that one does not count. That is not canonical. Strike that from the record book. No. I'm talking about my very first match in a legitimate wrestling organization. God, I remember it like it was yesterday.
He's got him up. Oh, my goodness.
Oof, yeah, quite an auspicious debut, huh? Well, it's comforting to know that even though my debut wasn't that great, there are tons of other wrestlers out there who've debuted on a much larger stage and have failed at a proportionate level. And this week, I'm gonna rank them the top 8 worst debuts of all time. Number 8, The Ringmaster. In one of the most baffling decisions that WWF ever made, they hired Steve Austin, who was relatively well known in WCW and had a bit of a career renaissance in ECW just before this, and made him a bland guy with no background or personality, with Ted DiBiase as his mouthpiece. No offense to Ted DiBiase, but Steve Austin never needed a manager. Austin shed the Ringmaster gimmick within months of his debut in January of '96, practically a blip on the radar compared to everything else that happened in his career, but man, it was a weird detour. Imagine if he went with Otto Von Ruthless or Chili McFreeze instead of Stone Cold. I tell you, just thinking about those awful names gives me the chills. Oh god, I guess that meant it would have worked. Number 7, Glacier. Speaking of cold, in 1996, WCW promoted Glacier with roughly 5 months of ridiculous vignettes. With that kind of build, you hope the guy would turn out to be a tremendous badass, but as it turned out, he was a tremendous chilly flop. For one thing, his debut match wasn't on a high-profile show like Nitro, but rather an episode of WCW Worldwide against a guy called The Gambler. When your opponent is a creepy, pantsless maverick, you're off to a bad start. Second, his gimmick was immediately dated. Everything about him was blatantly ripped from Mortal Kombat. It was especially reminiscent of the first MK movie, which was A, awful, and B, more than a year old. Maybe they didn't spend so much time hyping him up as Push would have been more topical. And third, well, he kinda sucked. Glacier's biggest feud was against Wrath and Mortis. Now, on paper, a feud with these wild fantasy characters would have kicked all sorts of ass, but it was going on just as the reality-based NWO was picking up steam. Suddenly, crazy masked karate wrestlers had become passé, which seems kinda crazy now when you consider they had a metaphysical Ultimate Warrior in the company just 2 years later. Glacier became a glorified jobber before eventually being repackaged as Coach Buzz Stern. Blood might not have run cold, but his push sure as hell did. Number 6, The Kiss Demon. I have to give one thing to WCW.
One thing?
They really went balls to the wall when it came to debuting their new wrestlers, really making them out to be stars, whether it be months of crazy vignettes or a full-fledged rock concert. In 1999, Eric Bischoff struck a deal with the band Kiss to debut a new wrestler in their image. It had the potential for a perfect crossover. Kiss has plenty of die-hard fans and is one of the most recognizable looks in all of pop culture. The Kiss Demon was unveiled in grand fashion in late August during a live performance by the band at the end of an episode of Nitro. Now, debuting a new wrestler at the end of a show can be a very powerful way to get someone over, but here's where WCW made their fatal mistake. It happened during a concert. Historically, live musical performances are not big draws in wrestling simply because it's not wrestling. Nobody actually watches these things unless the musician's getting powerbombed off the stage. The segment that revealed this brand new, very expensive wrestler was a total dud. One of the worst rated segments in Nitro history. They closed the show like this. Soon after this disaster, Eric Bischoff left the company, and the Demon's contractually mandated push suffered greatly in his absence. The Demon got beat up all night and looked up at the lights every day. Plans for a Kiss-themed stable were scrapped. WCW's deal with Kiss included the Demon wrestle a main event match on pay-per-view, which did indeed happen. 4 matches into Super Bowl 2000 in a, quote, special main event, which he also lost. You had to laugh because you knew the gimmick was gonna die. Number 5, The Yeti! I know I'm piling on WCW a bit here, but come on, just look at this.
Heenan just left the broadcast booth. Get back here. What is that?
If you blinked, then you missed the very first glimpse of the Yeti at the end of a Nitro in October of 1995. A few days later at Halloween Havoc, things were going so well for the show by that point that it only made sense for the Dungeon of Doom's insurance policy to come out and help the Giant attack Hogan in the main event. This right here, folks, is why you never see a double-team bear hug. Right after Halloween Havoc, the Yeti ditched the mummy getup and became a ninja, the super giant ninja to be precise. WCW, our wrestlers are named by 6-year-olds. You can count on one hand the number of appearances SJN made before becoming Reese in Raven's flock. Though some say on quiet nights, you can still hear the sound of the Yeti dry humping some poor bastard to this very day. Number 4. Fantasio. Breaking things up with a WWF induction for a change, and the stupidity of this one is spellbinding. I know. Fantasio, the wrestling magician, only made one televised appearance on an episode of Wrestling Challenge in July of 1995 against future Baldy Tony DeVito. His offense included streamers and pulling his opponent's underwear out of his singlet before pinning him. If you think today's crowds in WWE are quiet, then you haven't heard the audience in this match. No, literally, you haven't heard them because they're dead silent.
And it does it one more time.
Maybe Fantasio cast a sleeping spell on all of them. So why did this guy disappear almost as soon as he arrived? Well, if you ask the man himself, it's because The Undertaker didn't like him. In an interview, Harry Del Rio says the dead man thought the Fantasio gimmick was a little too close to his own. Vince McMahon agreed and sent Del Rios back down to developmental in Memphis. On the one hand, maybe Del Rios' story is completely false, but on the other hand, how funny would it be if The Undertaker felt threatened by the Magic Mime? I know his character in 95 was a lot different than what it is now, but could you imagine, would there be any confusion between those two gimmicks?
Watch me pull a rabbit out of a hat. Oops.
Number 3. 7. Back to WCW we go. It was late 1999, and if there was one thing that Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara were good at while in charge,
one thing.
It's that they loved to blur the lines between fiction and reality. What was part of the script? What was a work? What was a shoot? This was the basic theme in WCW at the time. For a few weeks, fans were treated to some of the most horrifying vignettes of all time, featuring Dustin Rhodes as Simmons. Rhodes eviscerated the new gimmick that he was given and cussed out the powers that be for giving it to him. He then went on to perform as himself for the rest of his time in the company. Okay, so let's assume that this swerve was planned from the beginning by the people in charge in WCW. Why? If the payoff all along was for Dustin Rhodes to wrestle as himself, why go to all the trouble? Why spend all the money on an elaborate new entrance and music and the costume and the vignettes and the child actor and... Number 2. The Shockmaster. Simply put, this was one of the biggest gaffes in WCW history, in wrestling history really, and for good reason. The year was 1993. As Fall Brawl was fast approaching, Booker Dusty Rhodes pegged Fred Ottman as a last-minute replacement for the big War Games match with himself, Sting, and the British Bulldog. Ottman, who had previously been known as Typhoon and Tugboat in the WWF, must have thought the days of silly gimmicks were behind him. Ooh, how wrong he was. In a clip you've seen on Botchamania dozens of times, the Shockmaster first appeared on the Flair for the Gold segment on Clash of the Champions 24. I mean, look at this form, folks. This botch is legendary. Just look at this. Pay attention to study this. I mean, you can see he starts out so headstrong and confident, then he teeter-totters over the board and falls on his face, and his glittery Stormtrooper helmet falls off. I mean, it's amazing he didn't put it back on backwards. That would have made it, say, magnifique. God bless Sid Vicious for trying to take it seriously, but there was no saving this one, especially with Ole Anderson providing the voice for the character off in another room.
You want a piece of me? Come and get me. Come after me, Sid.
They tried to recover this debacle by turning the Shockmaster into a bumbling construction worker, which I guess is a step up. Ottman later spent time as the Super Shockmaster, which, although it looked a little more legit than the original, didn't last long. Maybe in an alternate universe, the Shockmaster didn't trip in his debut. He would have had a star for the ages, but probably not. Before we find out who had the worst debut of all time, let's look at some honorable mentions. Lord Tensai. If you're going to repackage a guy who's as instantly recognizable as Albert, you damn well better give him more than a little bit of kanji on his face to hide his look. But ask yourself, folks, did it really ever get better for him? Triton. Weeks of cryptic, badass vignettes led to the debut of this big mofo named Triton, who seemed to have it out for Monty Brown. Triton's debut match with the alpha male was sloppy as hell. He didn't even stick around for the end of the match. He was suddenly replaced by a masked Midian, who Brown pinned to win the match, I guess. I mean, I'd question it, but hey, at least Midian had his clothes on this time. Fake Diesel and fake Razor Ramon. An angry, vengeful Jim Ross returns after his first bout with Bell's palsy and promises to bring back Diesel and Razor after they just left for WCW. Well, sure, they got two random dudes dressed as the former WWF stars, but I don't know, it just wasn't the same. I guess that means JR's heel turn was effective. That guy who played Diesel had some potential though. Wonder whatever happened to him. The ECW Zombie. What? I'm not going to play the clip. No. I've played it enough times in this show. I'm not going to play the clip. Hey, look, when I say I'm not going to play the clip, that means I'm not going to play... Son of a bitch. And the #1 worst debut of all time is the Gobbledygooker. Make no mistake, the Shockmaster's debut was truly awful and it absolutely ruined Fred Ottman's career, but here's why it was one iota better than the Gookers. At least the payoff for the Shockmaster included some wrestling. For months on end in 1990, a giant egg was carted around from show to show in the WWF, hinting that something big would come out of it once it hatched. The big reveal finally came at Survivor Series 1990.
Is it a dinosaur? Is it a rabbit? Balloons? Is it the Playmate of the Month? Who knows?
I don't know what's more difficult to fathom, that a Playmate of the Month could come out of the egg, or that Mean Gene believes that rabbits come out of eggs. Anyway, the egg finally hatched and it got the response you might expect.
What in the world? Oh my God!
You know the rest of the story, folks. The Gobbledygooker makes his debut, does a dance with Okerlund, goes over like a lead balloon, and Hector Guerrero becomes the answer to wrestling's ultimate trivia question. I guess in hindsight, a giant turkey coming out of the egg was the best result we could have asked for. I mean, what else could have possibly emerged from the egg that would have had a better payoff? Suppose it was some kind of debuting or returning wrestler. That would have been terrible. That guy would have never been able to live that down. I mean, think of it this way. This was the same show The Undertaker debuted at. Oh my God, what if he was supposed to be the one coming out of that egg?
Rest in peace. Now who wants to see a magic trick?
From what I've read, the Gooker was apparently supposed to be some sort of kid-friendly mascot for the company, which makes no sense because A, it was only relevant for 1 month out of the year, and B, had nothing to do with wrestling. At least Wildcat Willie in WCW dressed like Randy Savage. At least Stomper in TNA, never mind, there's no defending Stomper, that was stupid. This debut had everything. Agonizingly long setup, terrible payoff, no long-term value, and that's why the Gobbledygooker had the worst debut of all time. Who else do you think belongs on this list? Let me know in the comments section. Be sure to thumbs up this video, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.